Spencer asked, what films are you most excited for this and next year? So, it's always interesting trying to get a sense of, like, looking at a release schedule and trying to say, okay, that's going to be the movies I really like and those movies I'm not going to like. Because of course, I can always be surprised, right? But then also, a lot of times, my favorite movies of the year ends up being... A lot of those movies that end up being my favorites of the year, they end up being smaller movies that wouldn't have been on my radar, may not have even been on a release schedule 12 months out. So oftentimes, like, if I were to... I've never really quite made predictions like this, or being like, this is the ones I'm, think are going to be really good. But with that kind of caveat in mind, here are the films looking at the rest of 2024 and 2025 that I'm most excited for. Most of them are because, like, I'm actually excited to see it, and other ones I'm like, I wonder how that's going to turn out. So looking in the near term, and this, I'm kind of surprised myself saying this, but when I was looking at the schedule, I was like, I am kind of excited for this. And that's Deadpool and Wolverine. I've never really cared for the Deadpool films. Like, I think they're okay, but I've never thought they were as good, or even, like, half as good as people make them out to be. But I'm really interested to see what the MCU does after having this kind of reset period, right? Number one. And number two, even though it is shallow for fan service and kind of undermines the ending of Logan, I am excited to see Hugh Jackman return as Wolverine, right? Like, that was my generation's, Well, I mean, I really grew up in, like, the heyday of superhero films, or at least that beginning kind of renaissance period of the 2000s. But X-Men really was a huge staple of that. X2, X-Men United, right, is one of my favorite movies of all time, not just superhero movies. So I've always loved Hugh Jackman in the role. So it's a little disappointing to see kind of that emotional closure we got with Logan kind of undone. But from my understanding, this is like a different version of Logan. But then at that point, it's like, what's the value then? He's not even really the same character. It's just the same actor playing the character, but like a different version of him. I don't know. So that's something I am going to be interested to see near the end of this month, right? Another movie I'm very excited to see is Megalopolis. So this is Francis Ford Coppola's, like, self-financed epic that he's been trying to make for, like, 30, 40 years. And it premiered at Cannes in France, and from my understanding, it's very, very polarizing. It's either people thought it was, like, the greatest movie ever made, or it's, like, one of the worst pieces of shit ever conceived by man, right? So I'm always interested to see a movie when it has that, kind of gamut of opinions, right? I think if you go on Letterboxd, usually they have, like, when you see, like, a score and they show, like, the kind of the bar graph of, like, how people rated it, it's usually, like, a bell curve. This one is almost completely flat. Like, there's some variation, but it's, like, every possible star rating is well represented, right? I think right now it has a 3 out of 5. So I'm very interested to see how this actually turns out once, like, non-film critics, people who have the ability to go to Cannes. I'm very interested to see how it plays. I know normal audiences aren't going to like it, but what about, like, the Letterboxd crowd, right? Like, that's just, like, cinephiles, if you will. Another movie I'm really excited to see is Nosferatu. So this is going to be, is it Robert or Roger Eggers? I'm totally blanking. Robert Eggers. So this is going to be Robert Eggers' new film. I was not a huge fan of the original Nosferatu from, like, the 20s, like the iconic horror film. I thought it was okay. I thought it was, like, a little overrated. But I love Robert Eggers' films. I love The Witch, and I love The Northman. I like The Lighthouse. I know people say, like, that's his best one. So I almost have, like, an inverted opinion about his movies. But I just find him a really compelling director. And I'm really, really excited to see him kind of return to more kind of psychological horror roots. And The Northman still kind of had that, but The Northman definitely was, like, a deviation from his, like, normal style. So I'm very interested to see how that turns out. I think it's coming out, like, the very end of this year. So looking into 2025 movies I'm excited to see, or maybe this is coming out in 2024, I can't remember. You never can believe this is coming out, and I'll believe it when I see it, because I feel like I've been hearing about this movie forever. The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Chapter 1. So this is going to be a sequel to The Passion of the Christ, the famous or infamous, passion narrative, passion play, if you will, that came out like 2004, right? And it's a huge hit, and it's still very popular with like the Christian crowd, right? And it was very financially successful, especially for an R-rated movie, especially at that time, right? So they're doing a 2-part sequel about the 3 days where Jesus was dead, and he's defeating Satan. So what I like the original Passion of the Christ. I don't think it's great. I think it would be great if it actually had like a vision, as opposed to just like, let's just tell these events like in sequence. It didn't really feel like it had a narrative or thematic shape to it. But it was very much the conceit of that, or like the raison d'etre of Passion of the Christ, was to recreate the Passion of the Christ as realistically and viscerally and as essentially, to put it bluntly, gorily as possible, right? This is like a complete 180. This is like fantastical and metaphysical and spiritual. I'm very compelled to see what this is. I know Mel Gibson is canceled, and Jim Cazale, I think is the actor who plays Jesus, is very much canceled. He's like very, very QAnon. He's gone off the deep end. But just as a Catholic, I'm just very interested to see what would this movie even be like, because we've never really seen anything like that. Two more movies I'm excited to see is Superman Legacy. I'm very, very excited to see what James Gunn does with the DCU. I'm not a huge fan of Guardians of the Galaxy. I liked his Suicide Squad movie. But everything I've been seeing out of this movie, whether it be pictures or news about it, it has intrigued me. It has piqued my interest, if you will. So I'm definitely interested to see that and really finally get a real Superman movie, because the last one we had was Man of Steel, which, even if you like that, I think we can all agree it was a deviation from like what Superman is in a lot of ways. So then before that, it would be Superman Returns, which I grew up with. And that was like 20 years ago. And a lot of people felt like that was just a pale imitation of the stuff from the 80s. Like, Superman does not have as rich of a cinematic legacy as someone like Batman. So it's going to be just exciting to see a new big screen Superman movie. Now, will it be amazing? Who's to say? And then finally, another movie. Again, there's a lot of superhero movies on this. Is the Fantastic Four. Again, kind of similar to my reasoning for Deadpool. I'm just very interested to see what lessons has Marvel learned, and how much damage control are they gonna do or not do? And if they don't do any damage control, that's gonna in some ways be even more interesting. So those are the films that I think I'm most excited for this next year. But sure enough, if I make like a best of 2024 list, I would be shocked if those movies are on the list, or rather, most of the movies on the list are going to be small things that I didn't even know existed until they came out.